What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. I'm Kangas, and today I'm covering some of the champions from League PC that should not be implemented into Wild Rift. Of course, Riot could find intuitive ways to incorporate the mentioned champs into the game, and that would be great, but without making significant alterations to their kits, we'd rather see these champions stick to the sidelines. But before we begin, we got a question of the day. What champion type do you want to see more of in Wild Rift? Personally, I think that we could use some more unique support champions outside of the traditional tank engagers and squishy enchanters. Where's my main guy Bard at? Anyway, let me know yours in the comments down below, and let's get into the video. Alright, to start off our list of champions we do not want in Wild Rift from the PC version, we got Summoners. First on the list is Malzahar, typically played as a mid lane caster. His kit relies on spawning voidlings that target enemies. These minions deal significant damage, allowing Malzahar to push out the wave with great efficiency, alongside granting fantastic DPS when swarming a single target. The biggest issue around a mechanic like this is Wild Rift's targeting system, which has 3 basic targets: towers, minions, and just the general attack. This tool is great in differentiating between general units, but since Malzahar's voidlings are characterized as minions, if he places them in the middle of a minion wave, it could become really difficult to focus down a specific voidling. In the more intense nitty-gritty plays, a single unkilled voidling may make the difference between life and death for Malzahar's lane opponent, creating a broken skill mechanic by abusing Wild Rift's somewhat flawed targeting system. Many other champions from League PC also share this issue, such as Heimerdinger. Rather than creating voidlings, Heimer creates mini turrets. These small units shoot continuously and when left unchecked, easily can take over the game, dealing area of effect damage. If he were to ever release in Wild Rift, he can simply place his turrets in the middle of the minion wave to create an abysmal targeting situation, thereby overwhelming his lane opponent. These turrets shred minions, turrets, and champions alike, and since he can create 3 at a time, if Heimer does release and abuses the targeting system, playing against the Yordle will definitely not be fun. So if these 2 champs were to be introduced, or honestly any champions that summon little minions, their specific minion spawning skill must be altered, or at least Wild Rift's targeting system should be improved. An example of a recommended change would be to make the turret targeting button work against champion created units as well, auto-focusing voidlings or Heimer turrets instead of minions. Doing so would facilitate gameplay significantly, allowing for champions to more directly control the matchup. This would probably be the most optimal solution, but then again, creates an issue when targeting them under the enemy's turret. And like I said, these 2 champions are not the only examples where the targeting system would create an issue, but more serve as an example for general summoning champs. Next up, we have Invisible champs. Talon is an assassin mid lane champion that excels at roaming the map. He's capable of jumping over terrain on the map at least once during a set period of time, allowing him to hop into side lanes in a matter of a couple seconds. First off, Wild Rift's map is already super small, and mid lane players already spend half the laning phase roaming the map. Adding in another champion that thrives on early roams would devastate the laning phase, incentivizing map plays from way too early on, rendering this phase of the game pretty much useless. To add on, Talon becomes invisible once he uses his ultimate ability, allowing him to jump to a single target to deal burst damage. In Wild Rift, the majority of invisibility champions are just straight up busted. Prime examples are Evelynn and Akali. With no vision wards and real outplay mechanics in the game for their invisibility, this mechanic is just unfair to play against right now. Another invisible champion that we do not want to see in the Wild Rift is Shaco. He thrives on being annoying, jumping targets, very similar to how Evelynn does, but with more trickery in his kit. Since vision wards do not exist, if Shaco does enter the Wild Rift, his jack-in-the-boxes would be insanely busted. By simply placing the trap down, it shrouds itself in invisibility, fearing whoever walks into it. The trap deals a lot of damage, especially when he's stacking AP, and is typically countered in League PC by vision wards or sweeping lenses. But in Wild Rift, although yeah, sweeping lenses do exist, most players still opt for sight wards because that's the only vision you have in the game. There's no way to purchase pink wards like in the PC version, so keeping your wards is essential to playing the map. With this knowledge in mind, if Shaco were to be introduced into Wild Rift, he can easily abuse key spots on the map, ambushing targets with his traps and leaving little room for outplay. But the issue with invisibility on champions isn't only the lack of vision wards in Wild Rift. These champions all tend to excel in popping squishies, be it the support or the AD carry. From experience from League PC, getting one shot by a Rengar while standing under a turret is just not fun, and getting assassinated by Talon or Shaco before you have any indication of their existence loses its novelty really fast. Even in Wild Rift, we're beginning to see more and more of this style of play from Evelynn, Akali, and even in some cases Katarina. We know Katarina doesn't turn invisible, but her 100-0 burst damage is not to be taken lightly and can definitely feel busted at times. So the more Riot pushes these burst damage carries in Wild Rift, the less viable other lanes and roles will inevitably become. I'm sure most of you guys know, but the Enchanter supports in Wild Rift are suffering a lot. These champions require a lot more skill to pull off successfully, while tank supports generally incentivize lower skill cap engages, scaling into damage-soaking machines. We're not saying that having strong tank support picks is bad, but at least give the Enchanter some opportunity to properly play the game. If more champions like Shaco and Talon join Wild Rift, Enchanter supports will just become juicy targets, incapable of peeling for their AD carry, and just very vulnerable to coming one-shot with no real outplay potential. Of course, if Riot gave the Enchanter supports and other squishy, slower scaling champions more survivability options, this wouldn't be as big of an issue. And again, it just comes back to the pink wards. If they're implemented, the invisibility from these burst damage carries would not be as dangerous. But in the current state of the game, these don't exist, leaving squishy targets extremely vulnerable to invisible damage carries, with only 2 realistic options to out them. Try to guess where the invisible assassin is while preparing to trade with them when they reveal themselves, or stand super far back to avoid being targeted. In most cases, the first option will still result in death, and the second option prevents any forward momentum, significantly decreasing advantageous playmaking potential. So Riot, if you're watching, please add some semblance of counterplay to invisibility before adding in more invisible champs. And these issues are already beginning to seep into Wild Rift, diminishing the fun when playing certain roles and increasing toxicity in the game environment. So if you haven't yet, go check out a related video on how toxicity is destroying Wild Rift for more details on that topic. So the third category of champions that we do not want to see in Wild Rift are champions that steal abilities from their enemies. I'm talking Zoe, I'm talking Sylas, and I'm talking Viego. We'll begin by discussing Sylas first and why exactly he would be terrible to have in Wild Rift. This specific ability stealing champion utilizes his ultimate, Hijack, to steal the enemy's ultimate ability. In League PC, this novel idea sees a lot of fantastic and unique play, adapting to different matchups, allowing for creative approaches in teamfights. The issue with implementing this mechanic in Wild Rift is that there simply are not enough champions in the game. Sylas worked well in League PC since there were well over 100 champions in the game when he came out, allowing for a large variety of ultimates to choose from. In Wild Rift, there's only around 60 champions, with only a handful really being useful in the meta. This means that chances are, if Sylas entered the Wild Rift, he wouldn't require that much adaptability to mastering the pick, which is kind of the point of him. Simply choose any of the area of effect ultimate abilities to win the game. And looking at the current meta, they will pretty much always be viable. With picks like Malphite, Katarina, Galio, and Wukong being played all the time, yeah, Sylas would just be busted. And Sylas players would just keep spamming the same broken meta ultimates over and over again, which would get old pretty quick. So the second champion of this nature up for discussion is Zoe. Thanks to her second ability, Spell Thief, she requires random active abilities from minions alongside picking up used summoner spells. Similarly to Sylas, there simply aren't enough abilities to warrant that kind of versatile champion in Wild Rift. The active item selection are purposefully very limited since those overly complicate the game. Most items in Wild Rift, with the exception of boot enchants, only offer passives, rendering this aspect of Zoe's passive kinda useless. To add on to the severity of the negative impact the champion would have on the game, Zoe's playstyle excels in one-shotting the enemy. By utilizing her ultimate portal jump, she elongates the distance of her effective paddle star range, with her third ability, Sleepy Trouble Bubble, extending further according to terrain. These allow her skill shots to travel very far distances, inconvenient for both the player using her and the player who she chooses to snipe. And that doesn't even take into account how you would even use those abilities in combination with the touch controls. Wild Rift hasn't fully perfected its map system, as it's really difficult to see past your own champion's point of view. This makes long-distance skill shots a little unfriendly to aim, as exact positioning is a lot harder to gauge than in League PC. The same problem makes predicting and therefore dodging long-distance skill shots unfriendly as well. So if a champion like Zoe were to enter the game, and even if they optimized her kit well to the controls, those who got one-shot by Zoe out of their point of view would not have fun. And Viego is essentially the same issue as Zoe and Sylas in regards to a lack of variety on Wild Rift. These picks all came out after a massive cast of playable champions had already been released on League PC, and when they did come out, Riot was criticized every time for lacking novel thinking for new champion abilities, as these would simply rip off other champs. Wild Rift still has plenty of creative, unique champions to port onto the handheld, and should not resort to these three until much later on. As a bonus, not to sound too negative throughout the video, here's a champion example that would be nice to add to Wild Rift. Caitlyn, the Sheriff of Piltover. Her partner Vi and her nemesis Jinx have already made their way into Wild Rift, so it only makes sense that we'd see some proper implementation for this AD carry as well. As one of League PC's most popular ADCs, boasting a very high skill cap and a history of professional play, Caitlyn's abilities aren't so different from those that already exist in the game. The marksman excels in extending the effects of crowd control, thanks to her second ability, the Snap Trap. The ability is, as it sounds, a trap, snaring the target while granting Caitlyn additional damage on her next auto attack. This would be the perfect addition to team fighting in Wild Rift, adding an extra layer of depth to an AD carry's micromanagement. Wild Rift is in a unique position to adjust and improve upon League of Legends history, making sure that they do not make the same mistakes in evolving the game. There's been some aspects of the past League PC metas that sparked outrage, prioritizing vastly unfair playstyles while diminishing the viability of entire roles. Hopefully Wild Rift will learn to avoid doing the same, or more adeptly address the issues that arise. So, how'd we do? If you disagree with any of the picks, I'm curious why, so let me know in the comments down below. And also, if you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like and sub to the channel. Also, we've got a crazy growing community Discord that you can join too if you're looking to find some friends to queue up with or just chat about Wild Rift. That's it for today, so as always, best of luck on the Rift, everybody. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time. They're just falling. Oh, there we go.